Well, what tells me is the export controls are working because that chip is not nearly as good. It's years behind what we have in the United States. We have the most sophisticated semiconductors in the world. China doesn't. We've out-innovated China.
Well, you mean Taiwan.
So the semiconductor wars are escalating. While the US still believes China is in a stone age, Europe is beginning to realize the truth. China's chip-making industry is much stronger than what the West really thinks. When it comes to chips, there are generally two types in the market we need to be concerned about. The first is cutting-edge chips, and these are your NVIDIA A100 and H100s. These are needed for AI technology and deep learning. The US has banned those exports to China on national security grounds. China is playing catch up here. However, there is another category where China dominates the world, and that is in legacy chips. These are semiconductors used in almost every device we know. Airplanes, fighter jets, and smartphones, they all use these chips. And because of China's industrial capacity, they are dominating chip production for the mass market. 31% of global legacy chips are produced by China, and that's over $200 billion in revenue. One country controls a third of the world's conventional chip supply. It's a reminder about the importance of supply chains. China's industrial base has allowed them to conquer the sector. They aren't there yet with the 3 to 5 nanometer chips, but it's just a matter of time. Their domination of legacy chips gives China quite a few advantages. They now have the capacity to scale production once they make the breakthrough. But more importantly, this gives China a big revenue source for research and development. Take China's semiconductor exports to Russia for example. Because of Western decoupling, Beijing is now dominating the Russian market. Semiconductor exports have flown up, and chip-making equipment to Moscow was well above $200 million, and this amount will only grow further in the years to come. It will help fund China's R&D. America's technology war is also dragging their allies into the mess. Biden isn't just restricting US chips to Beijing. There are arm-twisting companies in Japan, Taiwan, and Europe to toe the line, to stop selling chips to China. And the reason is very simple. The US is afraid of China making real progress.
Well, we are trying to choke their military capacity. So if they feel that, that means our strategy is working. We are not going to, certainly on my watch, we are not going to sell the most sophisticated American chips to China that they want for their military capacity.
And we're going to prevent any company from doing that?
Said,
you can't do business with the United States in this industry if you want to sell those chips to China, correct? We're going to stick to that?
Absolutely, yes. But I do want to be clear. We will also still continue to sell, billions of dollars of chips a year to China, because the vast majority of chips that are made are not, the leading edge, cutting edge that I'm talking about. And that is hard. That's hard for people to accept. It's a kind of a nuanced, complex message and policy reality, but it is the reality. But we're also going to sell, like I said, billions of dollars of less sophisticated chips, which, by the way, Chuck, is good for America. Creates revenue for American companies, which they can plow back into research and development.
But even Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, admits that you can't avoid the Chinese market. It's simply too big and there's too much money on the table to leave behind. It's important we put things into perspective here. Western narratives tells us that China is a threat and collapsing at the same time. It's really confusing. So let's use the numbers as a guide, as a reality check. Even after all the restrictions, China still accounts for $10 billion in revenue for NVIDIA. Remember, China isn't even buying the most advanced chips. $10 billion is a big amount of money for a single country. And this situation is playing out in Europe as well. ASML is a Dutch chip maker. They comply with US tax sanctions on China. Even then, Chinese companies are their biggest customer. In Q1 this year, China accounted for 2 billion euros in revenue. That's 49% of total sales for the company. China is the biggest revenue driver for ASML even after all the export controls. That's the level of dependency Western chipmakers have with China. If this money suddenly disappears, you'll see company earnings collapse. and tons of job losses. So it's common sense to treat your best customer well, right? Especially if you're Europe. It's simple business 101, but it's not happening because of US foreign policy. Washington wants G7 allies to stop servicing their Chinese customers now to make it harder for Beijing to develop their high-tech semiconductors. The US wants to corner the AI chip market, but they have no control over China's legacy chip industry. And now Europe is freaking out over this. Europe is ringing the alarm bells. China wants their car makers to buy more chips from local firms, to ditch Western chips and focus on local Chinese foundries like SMIC. This is a big problem because the West still sells a ton to Beijing. Companies like Infineon in Germany are in panic mode. Thanks to the tax sanctions, China is moving fast and they're doubling down on their chip industry. And their strategy now is ingenious. They are replacing the semiconductors in their own cars. To make an EV, you need around 3,000 chips, especially for the latest models. The chips themselves cost over $3,000. China today is the biggest EV exporter in the world. They have overtaken every country when it comes to electric vehicles. China no longer just makes the chips, they also make the products that use those chips as well. And they're starting to make a move to decouple from the West over there. The Chinese government is now asking companies like BYD and Geely to abandon foreign semiconductors and go local. It's a powerful combination that allows their chip makers to grow and innovate better. The idea here is to keep Chinese money flowing within the domestic economy. Chinese chips, at least the most advanced ones, are still 5 to 10 years away and they need to innovate in a hurry. And to do that, you need money. Now, it's true that China throws a ton of subsidies to all their companies, but it's simply not enough. It's quite counterproductive if all your EV brands keep buying chips from the US and Europe. Modern cars today are relying more on electronic parts. By 2030, 45% of a car's production cost will come from electronics. Semiconductors will account for a big proportion of that. As China continues to roll out more cars around the world, especially across Asia, they will earn a ton of money. And if all the chips in the EVs are China made, guess who wins? The semiconductor industry. They get more money for research and development. And a big shout out to our sponsor today, Indigo Precious Metals. When it comes to buying gold and silver, I trust Indigo Precious Metals in Singapore. They have made investing in precious metals safe, fast, easy, and simple for both small and large scale buying. I've been stacking gold for over a decade now, and I've learned two things when buying. You want to buy authentic gold bullion, and you want to buy it at the lowest premium possible to stretch your dollars even further. And I'm glad to say I found both of this at Indigo Precious Metals. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world today. We have geopolitical chaos and the values of fiat currencies getting debased. Inflation is not gonna end, and that's why I consistently buy gold to preserve my wealth. Indigo Precious Metals is a leading retailer in Singapore. They specialize in physical gold, silver, and platinum. They are my one-stop shop when it comes to buying bullion. Their prices are sharp, and they have the best brands on sale, and I can test the gold on the spot. So if you're looking to make your first gold purchase, Indigo Precious Metals is the best place to start. Whether it's 1 ounce or 1 kilo, this is the reputable dealer you are looking for. So take action today. Click on the link below and enjoy a discount on your first purchase with the code SeanFu. Start your gold stacking journey today. And just listen to Philip Wong, the chief scientist at TSMC. You cannot underestimate the Chinese industry.
What about China?
China is, I don't think we could ignore their capability. The only thing that I see that the US is still a little bit ahead is in coming up with the new ideas. What the Chinese always say, going from 0 to 1. Namely, starting from nowhere, nothing, and come up with this really new idea. And if I look at what I would call new idea that is not been discussed before, the US still, if you read the research papers, the US still is the principal place where these new ideas come from. But once these new ideas become known, then
you see mushrooming of this new
Exactly.
ideas in other places.
Exactly. And I feel it in my everyday research with my students.
Oh my gosh.
Any new ideas that we come up with, once they become known, this is a good idea.
The next week it will show up in China.
It will actually show up in China. Not only that, they do it better than you.
Yeah.
I cannot compete anymore. They have better resources. They have more students. They have more funding from the government. I cannot compete anymore. I have to get out of that field.
China's strategy lies in their EV dominance. They are the largest exporter in the world after all. Just in October last year, China exported over 130,000 EVs. These aren't just Chinese cars but global brands like Tesla as well. And because Beijing controls the entire supply chain, the shift towards Chinese semiconductors can be tremendous. The majority of EVs made in China could be fitted with chips also made in China. It will happen slowly at first and then suddenly at once, just like everything else. And this is why Europe is really afraid. The only advantage they have left is a head start. Manufacturing costs in the EU are extremely high, especially in Germany. Things are very different in China. President Xi has made it a national directive to step up innovation, and the companies in China, they are listening. They are building out a ton of semiconductor plants over the next few years. Around 100 new plants are being built globally, and 40% of this will come from a single country, China. Chinese companies are building 41 new plants. That's at least twice more than either Taiwan, Europe, or the US. There's no comparison here. The quantity game has been won. China can flood the world with affordable chips to grab market share, and the first place they will do it is their domestic market, their EV market. A tsunami of cheap semiconductors is going to sweep across Chinese automakers. And in terms of revenue, local chip makers, they are going to make bank. The amount of money flowing into semiconductors will be incredible. Their foundries will have a ton of money to develop cutting-edge chips to compete against the US. It's just a matter of time now. China is playing an epic game of catch-up, and we can see how serious they are. This is a chart of capital expenditure to sales ratio of global chip makers. The higher the number, the more a chip maker is investing versus how much they are earning. Chinese foundries, including SMIC, are pouring in money like there's no tomorrow. Their focus is to expand production capacity to capture future sales. Their capex is almost equal to their total sales. It's well over 90%. China chipmakers are investing double that of Taiwan and almost 3 times higher than the US. And that's how committed they are to winning the war, the semiconductor war. The plan to replace Western chips in their cars will only speed things up. It's a very simple equation here. More revenue earned means more money to invest in developing better chips. This is China's playbook for industrial domination. These companies can ignore lower profits for a very long time. They are playing the long game here. In the meantime, the biggest loser of this will be Europe. The deck is simply stacked against them, and there's not much they can actually do. A lot of German automakers build their cars in China. Volkswagen and Mercedes have big production plants in the country. And if Chinese chips cost less, chances are, to stay competitive, they will have to make the switch there. Beijing is telling their car makers to use more local chips, up to 25% of their total sourcing. The number is around 10% today, but by next year, this number could easily double or maybe even triple. And because of the EU trade war, we can be sure China won't feel bad anymore. The EV war we see today is just a start. Things will continue to escalate, and the next battleground will be semiconductors, and that's even bigger. The West is ahead today, but in 5 to 10 years, China will have both the quantity and the quality. But let me know what you think. Will China's plan work? And does the EU even have a response to this? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.